I have chosen a rather grandiose title for today, but we'll explain it later. So the topic is strategic advantages and challenges of the open information sharing culture in the gaming industry. And it should still also have the word Finnish and maybe a few other things in parentheses, but we're talking about rather um, Finland related thing here. Uh, my emphasis will be on the strategic side, even though I'm talking about stuff you may already know. And this is intentional. So the idea here is to give you a kind of grammar and understanding on phenomena we have as researchers found and the advantages that are connected to it. And as said, you may be quite familiar with some of the things that I will be talking about here. If you are still studying to become a games industry worker, then some of it may not be familiar, but let's see with the questions happening later on. Um, Very quickly, why you are listening to me. So I'm professor of information studies and interactive media from Tampere University. I've done my own doctoral dissertation on games as information phenomena. We will not be going to that side. At this point, I currently do research also at Aalto University, studying design management in the games industry sector. So how to lead creative individuals, what kind of management practices might in that area be very different from the ways in which your traditional organization studies or management book explain how companies should be led and managed, and especially how the people in the industry should be led and managed. Happy to answer questions about that as well. I've been editing a few game studies journals, and while this is my sort of personal hobby research project, which I take very seriously, my everyday work is mostly spent on studying dark web phenomena. So quite different, but from my perspective, we're talking about information sharing in many ways. So everything I do is somewhat connected. What I will be talking about here today is something that's part of a larger research project where we have been looking into collocation of creative industries. In the digital world, collocation can be a very flexible thing, but in general, the old rule that people who work for companies that have that share the same location or proximity are more likely to be friendly and to share best practices. Finland is a bit of a special case in this, but in general, sort of we're looking at what happens when there are hubs, more or less formal and so forth, how they create value, and especially how they create value together, the ways information gets shared, everything from very official info sharing with shareholders, or how it's something that's said over beers with the person working for another company who might just be your co-worker in a few years and so forth. The members' information sharing practice is exactly this kind of by the beer or other event approach, and then how innovation and how competitive advantages arise from all of these together. So something you might be familiar with, but you may have not have seen some of the words that are used in this research. We're doing this with a flexible team, so the team leads are Professor Miikka J. Lehtonen, who is currently a design professor in Tokyo, and myself. And as a result, we've been looking at companies, especially in Finland and in Japan, but also to some extent, for instance, Poland has been a personal research area of interest to me, and through collaborators, then North American design as well. Some partners from Tallinn, from Hanken School of Economics, and so forth. I will list the text where you can listen, read more a bit later. And reason why I am talking to you here is that we have been following the developments of, in this case, these numbers are from the Finnish industry alone. We then have other samples, but what I'm talking about today is based on sort of this, that in 2012 we started interviewing experts within the Finnish game industry, or near it, had 23 interviewees. Then I gathered data in 17 and 18, very quick questions on sort of what are you allowed to share, why are you sharing, how does your company utilize this information. And the next step, we interviewed 15 people out of those 23 again. And then last year, we interviewed them once more. We've been following sort of what changes in the industry, what does not, how does it look from different perspectives in the organizations and so forth. And with special emphasis on the information angle, because Miikka is especially an open innovation scholar among many trades, and I am interested in the information flow that is used for design, and also that is used and shared as shop talk. So why we're doing this? We're trying to identify strategic practices that help companies gain competitive advantages from the sharing, especially on the side of innovation and diversity of ideas, which is something that where the Finnish case is very different from the other ones. To identify hindrances to information flow in design, and this is something that I think is less discussed in industry settings, at least as far as I know, even though each company, of course, analyzes its processes now and then. We're trying to find tools that would make the industry more robust and resilient and more competitively advantageous compared to the others. And this brings us to today's topic or theme, which is how to be strategic about something that is non-strategic, in this case, the information sharing. If we were in an open environment where I could see everyone's hands, I would love to ask questions about how you are sharing what and when, and become more informed, maybe fine-tune this presentation a bit further. But I now have to work with earlier data, which includes a couple of visits to Kajaani region, and also asking people about these things there, but that was a while back, so obviously there have been changes along the way. The central concept used in this approach is co-opetition, which is the situation where two or more companies compete and they collaborate at the same time. This may sound familiar or very alien depending on your career stage. For instance, co-opetition is a concept that has been around in business sciences, and especially the study of corporate advantages and hindrances for a few decades now. So co-opetition can be completely organization-wide, or such that the companies compete in some areas and collaborate in some. The sort of classical example of this is the ways in which marketing departments between companies can be highly competitive while the companies are developing certain core technologies together. This happens especially when you are producing software for certain tech providers and so forth. The normal situation for co-opetition is that it's very high on tension between the companies, and it requires a lot of trust. The Finnish game industry is a kind of exception to this rule, which we always have to explain to other scholars or people from other development communities, simply because people tend to be here in a high trust environment, and on the other hand, usually a co-opetition tends to be more on the collaborative side, at least on the level of coordination between organizations. The idea with co-opetition and why it's done, officially they say that this is where the competition between companies creates extra drive, so you are competing harder because you are in such close proximity, sometimes physically, sometimes simply through collaboration things. The competition side brings extra drive to the things, while the collaboration brings synergies and uh, oftentimes these days also the ability to diversify offerings, meaning you're not doing the same thing as the neighbors, and that is by design intent rather than luck. This has been studied since the 80s. Classical examples are Scottish network companies that were very nearby each other and started to share instead of competing heavily against each other. Game design industry, craft breweries, which have been studied also in other countries, which tend to be really friendly, and they, like game companies, have surprisingly often realized that they are not really competing against each other, but rather against the bulk providers. So for each craft brewery, it's in their business interests to make sure that people are craft beer buying oriented, willing to spend extra on that, and then they sort of sub compete then on whose bottle or can is selected, but the same principle applies very much in other areas as well, that sort of whether you are going with the mainstream or trying to make sure that smaller products are also visible, and given how competitive the games market is, it is rather surprising that the phenomena that I'm talking about here seem to be very big surprises to people when I talk about this abroad. Like, can you really trust others? What is it built on and so forth? I get loads of questions on how to localize things, and answers are few and far between. Very quickly flash the slide, which I usually show abroad, where it's like, oh, actually the Finnish games and services, but you may not know where they come from. So if we look at the attributes of the Finnish scene, you feel free to contest me or something, but from the perspective of looking at it from the outside, but connected and following the trends, what makes it remarkable from the collaboration competition side and how they exist together, highly divergent products, strong brands with copying obviously being rather rare. If we compare to other countries and their sharing communities, the key difference that we can see is that copycatting becomes a lot more probable once you exit communities where everyone knows what everyone else is doing, and therefore are able to see sort of staked claims on certain styles, certain ideas. Uh, Friendships, high staff mobility, nothing stays a secret in this country very long, at least not in this industry and not in a few others. Very much these resilient values where even ownership changes do not tend to alter the sharing culture and so forth. The other areas that we've been following with interest in comparison. So Poland, where you have these really friendly meetings between people, but they are really careful about not saying too much about what they are developing or when, except some very fringe or indie people, and instead sort of dancing around, and you see this in the way ideas get utilized by others to a larger extent, whereas as here the approach is very different. The Indian indie scene is something we are currently looking into, and how whether they are developing towards this kind of friendliness or not. Uh, Here is something from the research as well. So when we interviewed the people, Mika asked them to draw their ecosystems. This is old from the first data set, but sort of during the interviews we asked who is in your network, how are you connected to whom. The other pictures may have looked like mind maps or such. This is a very clear and simple example, but sort of we now have uh, 53 drawings ranging over a decade on who the major players are and are not. Here's something you may already be quite familiar with. Of course, it's more prominent in other areas uh, traditionally, and especially sort of the larger a local scene is, the more these happen. So I'm very quickly summarizing, since this might be less familiar to those who are still studying. So founding myth, people coming from the same background. The central point on why co-opetition makes a lot of sense. The market is elsewhere, so a bigger pie for all is a much bigger pie really for all. The way people switch uh, employers, overlap avoidance coordination, meaning that if you know what the others are doing and they already have an advantage, it makes a lot of sense to continue the open sharing, and the list goes on, but probably I don't need to explain a lot of these phenomena to you. Now we come to the sort of key point of this side of things. Then I will go to the challenges and things your company might pay attention to in the sharing culture. So from the competition research, uh, smaller firms tend to co-opete very flexibly. So if you're only a few people, you probably really, for mental health reasons even, need to talk about people outside of your own company because they understand what you are doing. Just talking between the two people or the handful uh, gets boring quite easily. So if you're small, you can really choose, because you know everyone, how much you can share safely without giving away all your ideas. So forth. You don't need to be really strategic about it, however you can. But when company size becomes bigger, the more necessary it usually is not to regulate what is being shared, except in the case of holding an international really valuable IP or so, but rather sort of how do we use the information that we get, and how open are we in permitting the open talks at parties between people and such things. It is valuable if it can be discussed sort of which areas are where open innovation are emphasized, and which are kept separate. This is surprisingly rare for a lot of companies unless they have really big structures and need this. So sort of when I've asked people, it's surprisingly often been like, oh, we sort of know the rules, but we haven't really discussed those further. Risk-aware assessments of potential trust. Any cooperative network fails if even one partner in that network starts defaulting, if they start stealing ideas or not delivering their part or so forth. So this is very much a house of cards in many ways, and people do not necessarily see that. So, in a culture of high trust, like the Finnish current situation still is, free interpersonal sharing culture, so letting people be quite open about what they share, while making sure that the ones who have legal claim to information are also kept happy and so forth. So finding this kind of balance is good. Open sharing is a great way of having your own staff also make the company look like an interesting employer. So even if you are not supposed to poach at events, you can create through the organically arising comments from happy workers a really good sense of your company being a place where people would love to work. And then it's good to keep in mind that even those who are not in the co-opetition game can occasionally still find good reasons to collaborate, especially on newer technologies. So in general, design info flows in this kind of a situation through official means, so keeping those who have the legal right to be updated getting updated. A lot of the co-opetition literature says that these companies are usually trying to find a consensus of opinions and styles and what is being developed through this strategic sharing culture, but it's not probably the case here. I would love to hear more about this later. So instead, more of a community building can also take place where people are happy to share. A very Finnish thing is problem fixes. So helping people in other organizations solve issues by giving them tips. In other countries, this might be considered heresy that you're sharing expertise, especially if you're doing it freely. Uh, Organizational level, usually sharing becomes a strategic thing. It's regulated. It's based on archives. It's based on dates, when to talk about stuff to others. When it comes to people being in the field, it's much more informal. And something that's very interesting is that it doesn't tend to be such that I will tell you this if you tell me something else from your company, but it becomes, when supported by trust and people having this strong idea of how much I can talk about, becomes a very elegant open sharing environment. And it is very much known from research that if sharing culture stops in some places, or if it's regulated too much, it stifles innovation. So by statistics, things say that being open and letting your staff really talk about the stuff tends to improve innovation possibilities. It brings problem fixes and so forth. So in general, it's a good thing as long as no one starts stealing from what is being shared or starts only to listen while others are sharing. Everyone has to be involved. So let's go now, since time is ticking fast, to some of the problems in organizations and their information flow. This is probably something that is very familiar, but on the other hand, needs to be stated quickly. So Claudia Eckert and colleagues did a big study on engineering companies 25 years ago, and then these ideas have been tested over and over and over, and it seems they hold water quite well. So I'm going to go rather quickly through this list. So uh, big picture issues. Not being aware of tasks. This is, of course, something handled by well done middle management and so forth. Lack of awareness of information history. This is a big pitfall, and it can come also in open sharing culture. So, sort of, no one has documented why certain decisions were made. So, record keeping can be really valuable, not just on what was decided before, but why it was decided before. If you're a small company, you can easily ignore this to a quite large extent, but in a siloed big organization, it can be fatal to good design if decisions information history is not shared further. There are plenty of separate studies on this alone. I could talk for hours about it, but the next time you are thinking about sort of passing information along to the next people, consider how much they would need to know also on why certain things were done. uh, Lack of awareness of how information is applied. This means that the person sending the info will not exactly know what is happening in the next place. So if you just think about production versus marketing and how much of a communication gap there can be in some organizations, that's a good example of not knowing what will actually be put to use and how, but there are plenty of other examples as well. And processes can change, but this is not easy to signal to other ones. Then we go to the information provision problems. So uh, it is very common that you sort of send the info along and you never get even a confirmation of what is happening. This can also happen between partners. So you just tell something and you have no idea what will happen next. Updates on how processes are currently going, hierarchy problems, consciously withheld information. Of course, this is something that everyone who is working for a paid employer must think about if they are not the person leading the entire construct on sort of how much you can actually say. Oversimplification, hearsay becoming more hearsay, more hearsay, more hearsay, and the fact that there is a lack of knowledge either on the next step or because the intermediary who is passing along the information is, for instance, not technically competent enough. And all of these things that I've been talking about here also affect the ways in which useful information is gained or not from these informal talks, which is what brings us to this representation and its interpretation here. So to understand a lot of the things that are passed along in the open sharing are based on understanding the context and the fact that the right people are present at these informal conversations. This is something that is sort of a thing to consider even on a strategic level. So if it's a design queue, it might be that the marketing or HR person who happens to be there talking, they have no idea what the value of that info is. But if it is coder to coder talk, for instance, then the likelihood of someone spotting that, okay, this is something innovative and vice versa, and be really, really big part on the strategy section of these processes. And therefore, it is important to think sort of who asks what, who tells what, who's present when and where, who might need to be introduced to someone else in order there to be top potential gains from the open sharing. So competition sharing happens in many ways. We have the organizational level. We have these events in which the games industry tends to be very good. So community post promotion, not just advertising something to external parties, but also to your competition. We did this. IGDA has been really good at promoting this kind of an approach, that in Finland, that you tell what was done and how it was done, and create a good employer image, innovative company image, and also a great excuse for people to then participate in informal sharing and to either ask more or say something like, oh, we're doing this kind of a thing as well, and might pick up cues from there, and vice versa again. Uh, Industry gossip, very important for open innovation, uh, and there need to be places and locations in addition to permissions, tacit or formal permissions to share. So you need these spaces where you can meet people who are outside of your circles, and research tells us that it's also very advantageous to include those who are not yet in the industry but are peripherally related to it, so students, journalists, others. In this sense, from a research perspective, the community is doing quite well in the areas that have present hubs to include also other parties in the sharing. Uh, the new companies are interesting in the sense that uh, research from other fields, especially from non-playful software industries, say that the companies need to learn to start to trust, and that they need to sort of switch perspective, grow into becoming cooperative, in the sense that they understand the advantages and they understand that they need both the attention and the collaboration. But startup people we've been interviewing over this uh, decade very much emphasize sort of that they already know this, either because they have come uh, from other companies and are bringing the best practices along, or because they very quickly come to realize that this is how the Finnish scene works. So we can be talking about so-called born cooperative companies here, where the practices are probably performed. And why I'm holding this talk here is to emphasize that even though you might be born cooperative, it makes a lot of sense to have at least one meeting where you are talking about the strategic side of this. Are we taking care of the information flow hindrances in our own organization? Are we sharing what are we sharing? Are there things we should not be sharing? So having this kind of serious talk on sort of how it's done, uh, while I would argue not trying to find reasons or excuses for withdrawing the open sharing process. This said, there are points when the strategic information withholding still exists and where it is necessary. I mentioned the IP. I mentioned often when I talk about this that some owners or shareholders might be very disinclined to accept sharing. So far, the entire Finnish scene has been very good at fighting against trends that would completely close information sharing. Some, as you may well know, companies have already become NDA islands which do not allow as much participation in this as the other ones. But from a research perspective, it makes sense to continue being in this and to try and convince external parties if they try to limit it, that currently, so far, and hopefully in the near and further future, it is a good thing to stay open in these matters. So that's what the papers are saying. So we're talking about something that is dynamic in the environment. A lot of this is asymmetric. So when you have something to tell, then you're telling the anecdote, and you do not expect someone to provide everything. But if everyone is openly enough talking, then you will probably end up in a situation where people will have learned something. So it comes around in a long circle as long as everyone engages in this. And this leads to a situation where companies can be actually mutually dependent, especially if they want to develop the ideas further. Then you need the communication to continue, um, which is usually a positive experience. So the sharing continues, the flow of ideas continues. There are ideas that are built on this, and as these open innovations grow, people become aware of them, they can ask questions, then knowledge based on those moves, especially as people switch employers in the long run, and this creates the kind of strong ties here between companies. They can be social, or they can be interpersonal in many other ways, or they can even be formal contracts at some point, because that's how certain parties like to organize their interactions. Do not forget the tension that is mentioned. If it becomes just collaboration, and we are one big happy family, it's probably not driving things along. So keeping it interesting, as they say in other fields, is also an important thing. So thinking about what is being told and what is not. The desire to be wowed, which is very much present here, and you could probably tell me a lot more about this than I could iterate here. We have just certain examples, but as long as someone else's cool stuff still makes you think, wow, and I would like to know more, then you're probably on very good terms with the cooperative mindset, also from a business perspective. Such successes tend to play in the advantage of everyone. We'll skip that quote. You can find it in a paper. Yes, so key findings, what we have. Free sharing is really advantageous as long as it's trust safe, and as long as the workforce has a kind of pride in what they have done. So This means that original designs are appreciated and people are proud of them. It leads to less likelihood of people wanting to copy others' products. And as we know, the first game to do something good tends to fill the market until someone else is able to provide a very innovative similar thing, but that takes time, innovation, and effort. So going the way that is very popular elsewhere, where you're trying to do dozens, thousands variations on something really isn't a good business strategy. The personal connections become important also in the sense that through the personal connections you can not just listen and share, you can also introduce the right people to the right audiences so that the sharing becomes more efficient and you are able to receive things so that the person who hears something has sufficient skills to learn something from it and then bring it to their own organization where it is then shared to the right parties so that the information can be used and it is not just shop talk. People who are so-called super encounters are especially valuable. So those people who easily entice others to share and are able to remember what is being shared and are able to communicate it skillfully and efficiently to others in the organization. Uh, this is not just active asking, but sort of really being in the right place at the right time, knowing the right people, appreciating the right people, having a kind of strategic attitude to gaining industry information, even if you are at the same time very relaxed and just talking with friends or acquaintances. So it's a special kind of skill that can be trained and learned, and it is very valuable in the long run. Because a lot of the time something you hear may not be useful when you are hearing it. It's at that time just shop talk and talking about something that is a shared passion. But being able to retain the information and then share it at the right time if there's a need or if there's a so-called supervening social necessity for instance, a new technology or a kind of game to fit the right niche, then knowing that yes, this was something I learned earlier can be put to use. So being strategic about also retaining information can be really useful and lead to significant advantages. And as my next right here, so the information needs to be there at the right time, not too early, not too late, but the early information can be drawn also from reserves if there are right people and the right kind of even documentation available in the company. For the sharing to be open, all levels need to be involved. So seeing also the top people at the events, seeing also the trainees or recent hires attending the events is important. If some levels of an organization refrain from the culture of openness, then it tends to dry out generally as people become less and less uh, sure that they can share as much as they want to share. And therefore, sort of, there needs to be at least a tacit agreement that everyone participates and everyone's allowed to talk about, at least to some extent, about what they are doing, then it tends to be efficient. And reminder, internal resharing is strongly expected and encouraged. So if you find something useful, tell it to other people who might put the information to good use, all in the spirit of still being friends with the others in the market. So do no harm, but create advantage would be the axiom here. Yes, here are the uh, articles we've been writing about this, or the most important. We've also looked at monetization and other things. The one that might be especially interesting would be the work on games as dish services, which is at the very bottom of this list. And yeah, you can read more about this elsewhere. And on a final note, sort of the industry's current moods, which I noticed will be a talk that is also coming in this series, might shed on light on how things might be changing, and the entire sort of community spirit and employment of opportunities, how those might affect how free the flow is. And with this, I leave you